throwing out a joint last week with that gooseneck microphone that's always over to the left. This is great. Let's pick up where we left off. We're roughly at poem number 35, 36. I can move around too. I'm a peripatetic teacher. Don't stand still. I find being tethered to the podium difficult as well. Let's kind of set the scene in terms of the opening section. We came across some beautiful poetry. I think essentially what Tennyson is doing is entering into the grief of the loss of a close friend. And what we read up through yesterday are the first, what would you call them, faint movements towards coming to terms with it. In many ways, In Memoriam is an intellectual as much as emotional. It's intellectual in terms of coming to terms with the meaning of death. He wrote the poem over a long span of time. It's not the immediate effusion of the poet on the death of a friend by any means. He asked himself the crucial questions about life. What does it mean to be alive and human in the mid-19th century? What is the relationship between ourselves and God and creation, death, life? Those are the questions that are being asked in some ways for the first time seriously in English culture, because it's only in the 19th century that those questions aren't already answered by your faith. They're questions that in the Renaissance people essentially don't ask because they know the answers to them. The church has the answers to them. But what we find in Memoriam is that the church doesn't have the easy answer anymore. And what we get today, for me, it's the heart and soul of the poem. And the latter part pulls out of this fascinating expression of the challenge you and I have as individuals to answer this question for ourselves. And that's probably the negative side of the Romantic age. You've got to answer these questions yourself. And he poses them in Tennysonian verse, which is glorious in many ways. He brings himself, if you remember, at the end of poem 27, to a sort of statement of belief, which we all remember so well. I hold it true, whate'er befall. I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. I think what we notice is that that's a statement of will, and much of In Memoriam is going to be a statement of will. This is what I choose to believe. I don't care what happens after this point. That's what "ere befalls" means, doesn't it? It's not as confident as we would like faith to offer us, but maybe it's the best we can get in the 19th century. As we move now to, shall we say, around poem 38, what we catch is that he's looking at what he can do. What can I do, after all? How can I help myself come to terms with loss? And in poem 37, you can see some of this sense of, well, I'm only one man. You and I know that history has pretty much shown that not only is he one man, but he's a very great man, and a very superb poet. Urania speaks with darkened brow. Thou pratest here, where thou art least. This faith has many a purer priest, and many an abler voice than thou. Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? To oneself, who are you to talk? You are by no means the best speaker of faith or endurance. You're prating. The children are the ones who pray, isn't it? Go down beside thy native rill, on thy Parnassus, set thy feet, and hear thy laurel whisper sweet about the ledges of the hill. And my Melpomene replies, a touch of shame upon her cheek, I am not worthy even to speak of thy prevailing mysteries. For I am but an earthly muse, and owning but a little art, to lull with song an aching heart, and render human love his dues. Nice language, very attractive. But that's what essentially he's saying to himself at this point in the poem, isn't it? All I am is just all I can do is sing a little bit. Ease the pain. Ease me a little ease, right? Remember what Milton said? Ease me a little ease. That's all you can get out of it. So the year goes on, and we remember that we're going through a period of Christmases and springs and falls, and we're going to be looking at the festivities and at some of the symbols of those, the paths one takes, the yew tree. And on poem 38, we see the first of a series of spring poems, and it doesn't take a lot of imagining to understand what the first spring after the death of someone brings you to mind, doesn't it? Why is it that the earth renews its glory, whereas my friend will never renew his glory? We are allowed one cycle of birth and life and death, and yet the seems to us that the message of nature is continual, recycling, coming alive again. And he looks around and he feels the pain that we imagine. With weary steps I loiter on, though always under altered skies. The purple from the distance dies, my prospect and horizon gone. No joy the blowing season gives, the herald melodies of spring, but in the songs I love to sing, a doubtful gleam of solace lives. If any care for what is here survive in spirits rendered free, then are these songs I sing of thee not all ungrateful to thine ear. Well, he's continuing to sing, but I think the key is in that second stanza, isn't it? The season doesn't give any pleasure right now. He's not worked his way through grief. The next poem refers to the yew tree again, and in poems 40 to 47, we see Tennyson dealing with the ideas, coming to terms with concepts, asking questions about the state of the soul after death. It's the question we all ask: where is Callum now? And where is the one I love now that it's all over? We can look at a couple of these. Take poem number, 41. No, I can't take, we got to go back. Let's go up to poem 40. And read the 40. I can't read it without doing 41. Could we forget the widowed hour and look on spirits grieved away, as on a maiden in the day when first she wears her orange flower, when crowned with blessing she doth rise to take her latest leave of home, and hopes and light regrets that come make April of her tender eyes. And doubtful joys the father move, and tears are on the mother's face, as parting with a long embrace she enters other realms of love. Her office there to rear, to teach, becoming as is meet and fit, a link among the days, to knit the generation, each with each. And doubtless unto thee is given a life that bears immortal fruit, in those great offices that suit the full-grown energies of heaven. Ah me, the difference I discern. How often shall her old fireside be cheered with tidings of the bride? How often she herself return? See, we can imagine many an occasion where people separate, don't we? There's in the context of life, I've left Wisconsin for years, and yet I can go back, and my father can talk with my sisters about Gary, and I can send letters, and we can sit around and remember that person's presence, and tell them all they would have told, and bring her babe, and make her boast, till even those that missed her most shall count new things, and dear as old. That is, you haven't lost a daughter, right? You've gained a son. You can think of all the common expressions to make easier what is truly a loss. When your child leaves home and marries, you've lost a certain relationship, a certain familiarity that has to be made up for by other compensations. And Tennyson understands that. But there are no such compensations to be given to the living when the loss is through death. And that's the very difficult part. The poem is getting more sober and more quietly depressed as it goes on. But thou and I have shaken hands till growing winters lay me low. My paths are in the fields I know, and thine an undiscovered land. It's a nice image, isn't it? We've shaken hands. We've said adieu, I suppose, huh? And we've gone off, and I am condemned then to continue on living, as he says, till winters lay me low, snow white, until I've gone through my life. But we will not have any of the compensations. Thy spirit, ere our fatal loss, did ever rise from high to higher, as mounts the heavenward altar fire, as flies the lighter through the gross. But thou art turned to something strange, and I have lost the links that bound thy changes here upon the ground, no more partaker of thy change. It's one of the most difficult experiences to come to terms with when you face death. And as I mentioned last week, I, within the last 3 weeks, went to the funeral of one of my former students who died in a motorcycle accident at age 19. And at the end of the funeral, they opened the coffin. And I went up to say goodbye, as did so many others who remembered him. And my thought was what I've thought so often, especially when young people die, and that is how unlike him it was to to be lying there so still. It's like bells for John Whiteside's daughter. You almost are angry with the young person who died, because this is a fellow, if you knew Mark Rogers, who never stopped. I had to tell him to be quiet and sit down probably 4,000 times in the 2 years he was my student. He was one of those boys who, if you let him go for a moment, would be literally hanging from the rafters. He'd be up there daring himself to fall. And the sense that I got was that he had translated himself someplace else entirely. I mean, I saw his body there, but I didn't see Mark Rogers. So I don't know what death is facing the corpse of someone like him. It's certainly that he's not there. That's what I knew. I don't know where he is, but whatever was left behind is not the person I remember at all. And they shouldn't have opened the coffin, because it didn't show me anything that I remembered. I think this is what Tennyson is referring to and getting at, that concept that it's an alien world. These are people who have gone to a strange country, and there's no lesson. Nothing comes back. So he says in poem 42, I vex my heart with fancies dim. And what we get is him questioning himself in some interesting ways about the possibility of what life might be like. I shouldn't say life, what death might be like for someone like Helen. So look down to poem 44. How fares it with the happy dead? It's an interesting question. How does it go with you who died and are happy? How fares it with the happy dead? For here the man is more and more, but he forgets the days before God shut the doorways of his head. The days have vanished, tone and tint, and yet perhaps the hoarding sense gives out at times, he knows not whence, a little flash, a mystic hint. And in the long harmonious years, if death so taste Lethean springs, may some dim touch of earthly things surprise thee, ranging with thy peers. If such a dreamy touch should fall, oh, turn thee round, resolve the doubt. My guardian angel will speak out in that high place and tell thee all. He's speculating, and it's an interesting speculation. Is there any connection from the other side? Because pretty clearly Tennyson is taking the phenomenon of death from both sides, from us left here coming to terms, and then the leap of imagination, which most poets do not do, though Dickinson did it frequently. Tennyson is trying the same thing. What does he mean when he refers to when he says, if death so taste the Lethean springs? What are the Lethean springs? Yeah, it's one of the 4 rivers in Hades, isn't it? And once you cross the river Lethe, you drink Lethe. You have forgot everything. Not that. But he imagines that perhaps there are moments when to the dead there are gleams of memory. He hopes there might be actually. And he hopes that if that happens to Helen, that his own guardian angel can speak out and they can keep the connection alive. The baby, new to earth and sky, what time his tender palm is pressed against the circle of the breast, has never thought that this is I. But as he grows, he gathers much and learns the use of I and me, and finds I am not what I see, and other than the things I touch. So rounds he to a separate mind, from whence clear memory may begin, as through the frame that binds him in his isolation grows defined. This use may lie in blood and breath, which else were fruitless of their due, had man to learn himself anew beyond the second birth of death. Can somebody pull out the meaning of that? What is the purpose of blood and breath? What use does it give us? He rounds to a separate mind, from whence clear memory may begin, as through the frame that binds him in his isolation grows defined. Can somebody get at what's the purpose of life, essentially, if that little poem is right?
What's the purpose of life if nothing is remembered of it?
Is that the question of the poem, you think?
Yeah.
The purpose of the purpose being? I think it's a little bit more specific than that. I think you may be asking that question. That is, you're asking it, and you're right. Why are we living? What's the purpose of being alive? Well, what do children come to gradually? It's almost as though he's saying that by being given a body, right, breath and life, what we are being given is the sense of self that separates us from other things. The baby who's on his mother's breast doesn't know this is me and that is her. He doesn't have a sense of separation. They don't imagine a world other than themselves. Psychologists say, for example, that the reason babies cry when mommy goes away is that baby doesn't have the leap of imagination to know that when mommy shuts the door, she's not gone. To a baby, all there is, all the world is them. And when mother shuts the door and leaves baby alone in the crib, baby thinks mother's gone. I mean, there is no mother if baby can't see mother. This is part of Jacob's theory, I believe. But it's an interesting concept. So as you grow, the baby learns there is me, and then there is not me, and the not me still exists even if I don't see it. So if mother's gone downstairs and left me in the crib, I don't have to cry because I know she's there. I think Tennyson is he's asking the central question, well, is this the purpose of life to define self? So that there's Gary, and then there's the not Gary. And without the body to tie me down, I wouldn't know who I was. I wouldn't have a distinctive... this is the use of blood, he says, and breath, which else were fruitless of their due. I mean, if body and breath didn't define you, what would its purpose be? Let's go down to 48. 50. Let's go down to 50. Continue, I think, yeah. We ranging down this lower track. Okay, so there's is it, pardon me, 46. We ranging down this lower track, the path we came by, thorn and flower, is shadowed by the growing hour, lest life should fail, and looking back. So be it. And there no shade can last in that deep dawn behind the tomb. But clear from marge to marge shall bloom the eternal landscape of the past, the lifelong tract of time revealed, the fruitful hours of still increase, days ordered in a wealthy peace, and those 5 years its richest field. O love, thy province were not large, a bounded field, nor stretching far. Look also, love, for brooding star, a rosy warmth from marge to marge. He's recalling that he had a few years of pleasure that he can look back on in his life, the pleasure of his friendship. And then 47. That each who seems a separate whole should move his rounds, and fusing all the skirts of self again, should fall remerging in the general soul. His faith as vague as all unsweet, eternal from form shall still divide the eternal soul from all beside, and I shall know him when we meet, and we shall sit at endless feast, enjoying each the other's good. What vaster dream can hit the mood of love on earth? He seeks at least upon the last and sharpest height, before the spirits fade away, some landing place to clasp and say, farewell, we lose ourselves in life. This is where Tennyson is moving. He's getting into the depths of his quiet grief, and he's arguing some theological cases. And one of the arguments that people are offering now that he's not willing to accept is the one in this poem, which argument about death? He thinks this is totally unacceptable. He doesn't want to think it. That is the end. That what happens to your soul after you die? Well, I don't think he's coming back, but it's in the sense of there's sort of pool of consciousness, or
you
yes, go right back and
lose your own identity.
That's right. You lose your identity and become part of what? God's soul or God's presence, and there's no you anymore. And that's fine when you're talking philosophy, and maybe it's fine when you're talking about theology, but it's not fine when you're talking about Helen. True? It's not fine when you're talking about the one you love. I don't want to think of the one I love being part of a general pool, like an insurance policy pool, where your money goes in and the money you get back isn't the same money. Right? I want to think that the money I get back is the exact same money I put in, or maybe just my savings account at the bank. He says, it's a vague faith, and it's an unsweet faith. I like that. It's not clear, it's not intellectually clear, and it doesn't taste good. because I think that's what sweet means here. And he claims, of course, that form will divide and keep that division. And so with poem 48, he apologizes for his verses, trying to bring us around to what he's doing. If these brief lays of sorrow born were taken to be such as closed grave doubts and answers here proposed, then these were such as men might scorn. Her care is not to part and prove. She takes, when harsher moods remit, what slender shade of doubt may flit, and makes it vassal unto love. And hence, that is, she is sorrow, right? And hence, indeed, she sports with words, but better serves a wholesome law, and holds it sin and shame to draw the deepest measure from the chords. Nor dare she trust a larger lay, but rather loosens from the lip short swallow flights of song that dip their wings in tears and skim away. She is sorrow. These poems which are born of sorrow. What does he suppose he means by that when he says, if somebody took these poems as a theological argument which would give us the final answer, everything's clear, they would be misunderstanding entirely what he intends. What does he intend of them? What's the purpose of them? Yeah. Yeah, sure. And that means he's got to consider intellectual or theological issues, but he's not trying to take the place of a theologian, is he? And so we shouldn't think of that in those terms. And he apologizes for the tendency in the poems to move in that direction. With number 50, we see him beginning a descent into the depths from which he's going to rise as he considers. And it's a kind of prayer. It's a very beautiful poem. I think many of you remember it. It's the prayer that you offer to God when you realize that you are low, emotionally and physically. You need some kind of strength. It's not the grief of the breastfeeding grief. It's the grief of just continuing depression. I've tried to fight this, and it's not coming around. And it's one of my favorite pieces from In Memoriam. I think you'll like it too. It was very sad. Be near me when my light is low, when the blood creeps, and the nerves prick and tingle, and the heart is sick, and all the wheels of being slow. Be near me when the sensuous frame is racked with pangs that conquer trust, and time a maniac scattering dust, and life a fury slinging flame. Be near me when my faith is dry, and men fly with latter spring, that lay their eggs, and sting, and sing, and weave their petty cells, and die. Be near me when I fade away, to point the term of human strife, and on the low dark verge of life, the twilight of eternal day. It certainly is a sad poem. I think it's debatable whether he's speaking to hell, the spirit, or God. I tend to think about myself as a broader. I think some people think he's referring to the spirit of hell as well. It could go either way. The key, of course, is the emotion that you feel is coming from. It's that moment when you've lost all strength. You can't fight anymore. And the words in the little poem are marvelous in their sense of creating an emotion that most of us have felt. When we do really feel, I can't endure the fight. I can't do it by myself. I need some help. It's the time when the blood creeps. And you've slowed down. Right? It doesn't mean creeps as in creepy. It means things are going so slowly that you hardly are functioning. The nerves prick and the heart is sick and the wheels of being are slow. It's a kind of depression that isn't obvious so much from the outside, isn't it? But it's very obvious from the inside that you are moving slowly. And he's got some marvelous images and lines in here. Time is a maniac scattering dust. Tennyson comes on strongly. And I think probably one of the nicest, nice and it's not nice, but most powerful images in the poem is his image of men like flies in latter spring that lay their eggs and sting and sing and weave their petty cells and die. Sometimes people do feel like that, don't they? That the people around you, especially in your mood, are like flies that are bugging you and stinging you, and gadflies perhaps, right? Sometimes when you read this poem, you think he's talking about the kind of people who come up and prick you with the sting of their goodwill and good humor and say, don't feel sad. And they are like, you want to slap them away, because really you do not want that kind of confrontation at all. That's number 50, and as you can see, he's very low. And so he's got to come out of it. Let's go over to poem 54 and watch him ask some questions, because this is where the intellectual subtlety and sophistication of the poem comes around, and this is the heart of the poem, I believe. He's going to ask himself questions that the 19th century needs more than any other time to ask. And the reason we need to read In Memoriam now in the 20th century is that these are the questions that gave birth to our century. And the questions that Tennyson asked are far more pertinent to us after World War II, after the Holocaust, after the things we have done to each other. The presence of evil in the world is so much greater today. We cannot deny its presence if we think about it, than it was in Tennyson's day when evil tended to cover itself up. There was evil then too, but people didn't do it anywhere near as openly as the evil of, say, World War II. And so the questions that of uncertainty that we must ask today are the questions he was asking, and it's pertinent now as ever. I think, myself as a former university teacher, that one of the greatest weaknesses of our university education in the humanities is that we allow students, undergraduates, to get an education at university without facing the kinds of issues that the 19th century asked us to face. Because I don't think you can be an educated man today without enjoying, experiencing what Tennyson is asking here. And the biggest weakness of the education in the English department at the UW is that people can get BAs there without coming anywhere near the 19th century. And that's terrible. An English major without encountering it? No way. It's just he's got money on that course too, I think. Look at 54. Oh, yet we trust that somehow good will be the final goal of ill. He sets up the way the 19th century and the 20th century as well have tended to come to terms with it. We do not find language which says, I know. We can't find it anymore, because that kind of assured theological knowledge, the knowledge of faith. I would think of Luther facing the court and saying, Hier stehe ich kann nicht anders, right? I'm standing on the truth. I have seen it. That's gone in the 19th century. And so what we need to do is have trust. We need to commit ourselves to it. He's moving very gradually to, for me, what is the essence of Edwin Arlington Robinson in American literature, in the sense of I'm going to choose to have faith. Choose to have it, which articulation shows that you don't have it thoroughly, do you? You don't have the confidence of it. And so he says, in spite of all this, we have to trust that there is a God and that the outcome is going to be good in the long run. Oh, yet we trust that somehow good will be the final goal of ill. To pangs of nature, sins of will, defects of doubt, and taints of blood, that nothing walks with aimless feet, that not one life shall be destroyed, or cast as rubbish to the void, when God hath made the pile complete, that not a worm is cloven in vain, that not a moth with vain desire is shriveled in a fruitless fire, or but subserves another's gain. Behold, we know not anything. I can but trust that good shall fall at last, far off, at last, to all, and every winter change to spring. So runs my dream. But what am I? An infant crying in the night, an infant crying for the light, and with no language, cry. Well, that is probably the heart and soul of the 19th century, the spirit, the desire. We must trust this, but what can we know? See, the 19th century has lost the adult knowledge of the world that once we had. Now we're children again. Darwin has helped out, but not only Darwin, the Industrial Revolution, advances in science, the things that were reliable, class, you knew who you were. None of those things are there anymore. And Tennyson has put his finger right on it. We must choose to believe this. And how can we in the 20th century be any more advanced in certitude than he was in 1870? If you read something like, that nothing walks with aimless feet, that not one life shall be destroyed or cast as rubbish to the void, when God has made the pile complete. You have to believe that. I don't know if any of you ever saw Jacob Bernowski's series on civilization. Remember that? I think one of the most overwhelming moments I've seen on television in the last 15 years is in the last episode where he is at Dachau, or I'm not sure which concentration camp it was, there in Belgium. And he's wearing a very beautiful gray suit, nice for the camera. And he's walking out into a muddy field. And you remember the one? He walks out, and as he's walking, talking about what it means now that we've made our way to the 20th century, and the camera doesn't show it, but he doesn't have any galoshes on, and he walks out in the field, and he's talking about the human spirit and what it means to be human. And the camera backs up, and it shows him standing ankle deep in mud. And of course his hands are ruined. And he says, I'm standing on the ashes of hundreds of thousands of Jews and so on. Human beings who were taken by the Nazis to this place and burned to ashes. Relatives of me and you, human spirit. And the challenge, essentially, of that program was to realize that you've got to get your feet wet sometimes. You have to face certain facts that maybe ruin the suit, to come to terms with the reality of what we have. Can we believe what Tennyson said in 1985, that not one of those people cast to rubbish, you see, lived a life without some end that will be acceptable to us philosophically, theologically, that there is a God in the universe after all. And that's why I wanted to do Tennyson with you today, because I don't think the questions are any different. They're far more compelling than the seriousness of this challenge. What am I as a child? Crying for mother to come and say, it's okay, Alfred, it's all right, I'm right here to take care of you. But you notice all he has is a cry. He doesn't have the words. It's the great dilemma of any poet to discover that there are no words for what he wants to say. When Whitman does Song of Myself, the ultimate message of Song of Myself is that I want to tell you that the heart and spirit of the universe is love, it's union, it's structure, but there are no words to tell that. We don't have a language to express the spirit in the universe, which for Whitman is very positive. And in Tennyson, there are no words to say what he wants to say, so all he can do is essentially offering an emotional statement, ultimately. So all this talking, but what do you come up with? Go on to number 50, make it 55. He's continuing the issue. The wish that of the living whole, no life may fail beyond the grave. Derives it not from what we have, the likest God within the soul? Are God and nature then at strife, that nature lends such evil dreams? So careful of the type she seems, so careless of the single type, that I, considering everywhere her secret meaning in her deeds, and finding that of 50 seeds she often brings but one to bear, I falter where I firmly trod, and falling with my weight of cares upon the great world's altar stairs that slope through darkness up to God, I stretch lame hands of faith and growth and gather dust and chaff, call to what I feel is Lord of all, and faintly trust a larger hope. This is basic poetic theology, I think, and certainly it's what we try to come to terms with ourselves. Another famous stanza, I'm sure you remember the poem I just read, and this one has some of the same concepts. He says, is it not that the desire that what once lived continues to live, that the meaning of the individual soul is some reflection of what all of us remember to be the basic tenet that God made us in his image, that there is something in us that feels the value of that. And then go on to say, could it be that God and nature are at strife, that the individual is not there? The Old Testament says, I knew you when you were in your mother's womb, right? I mean, I knew your name before you were born. Now that faith, that some individual value is there to God, that nature sends such dreams that we're not valuable, that we just go. And nature seems to be so careful of the type, doesn't it? But not the individual. And of course, we're going to go on to find out that in the 19th century, as in our century, nature is not even careful of the type. If you watched Dinosaur last night on Channel 7, you know that 75% of all plant and animal life was extinguished when the dinosaurs were extinguished. So if someone says, well, nature, it isn't that you or yourself are valuable to nature, but the type, the species is valuable. Even that's not true. The 19th century is learning that, you see, much to the distress of people who are literal interpreters of the Bible in terms of the day of creation and all of that. There are thousands of types that have come and gone. You're going to explore this phenomenon. Nancy? What do you mean by naturalism? It's a theory, the Philippine literary theory, of naturalism. Yeah, I think it is. It's a literary reaction to what was happening in science at the same time. We were losing our importance, were we not? Yeah. That's right. And what happens what's happening in France right now, he's writing this, and will happen in England, in America within a few years, is definitely a connection. We don't have, our literary ideas are not separated and unconnected to the rest of the world, and you're absolutely right. The literary theory of naturalism is the result of the loss of value in the individual, which doesn't make us not romantic, by the way. It just makes being romantic a heck of a lot less fun than it used to be. Because in the old days, romantics just had a lot of confidence in the value of the human soul and me and myself, but it becomes darker and darker the farther away you get from Wordsworth. And we're reaching that point now. These are the questions that result in what you're asking about. Yeah, that's true. And so what does he do? That famous last stanza, which still has a great deal of power. Though, Lord, I believe, forgive my unbelief. Remember? Lord, I want to believe, forgive the fact that I can't do it the way I want to do it. And this is his version of that. I stretch lame hands of faith. Look at the words in that little stanza, and you'll see how they combine. The first word is stretch. Stretch means to reach out beyond the normal range, doesn't it? And so, and his hands are lame. They're not hands with ability, with scope. So he reaches out his hands, trying to find some faith, and he gropes. But where do you grope? Only in darkness, right? So there's no light. And what does he gather with his hands? Dust, chaff, right? Chaff, the part of the grain that you throw away. And I call to what I feel is Lord of all. What I feel as opposed to know, and faintly trust the larger hope. Probably the key to faith here is the word faintly. I do not choose not to believe that I don't know. You hear that quality in the poem? Number 56. And here's an answer. To make it even worse, I suppose, is the answer I referred to a minute ago. So careful of the type, right? We come back to that. Nature is careful, and we can have confidence that the type doesn't go. But no. From scarped cliff and quarried stone, she cries. Nature cries out. 1,000 types are gone. I care for nothing. All shall go. Thou makest thine appeal to me. I bring to life. I bring to death. The spirit does but mean the breath. I know no more. That's what nature will say to you, doesn't it? That you cannot find. Would Emerson believe this? No way. Of course, Emerson is an early romantic, a high romantic, and his confidence that nature is the way we get access to the Spirit of God would make this unacceptable. So he probably read the poem. I should look up and see what he had to say. I'm speaking for him right now. Certainly his early faith would have had trouble with this. But this is what you and I would tend to say nature is. I create and I kill. And I don't care. I mean, nature could care less if every wonderful dinosaur that lived disappeared. And nature could care less if we disappeared too. It will do nothing to stop us. If President Reagan has an itch to push a button, we are all going. We're lucky we haven't had one who's done it. Because we can do that, and nature will not stop the Holocaust, the permanent Holocaust to all of us. I know no more. What is the spirit to nature? Just breath, in and out. That's it. And shall he, man, her last work, who seems so fair, such splendid purpose in his eyes, who rolled the psalm to wintry skies, who built him fames of fruitless prayer, who trusted God was love indeed, and love, creation's final law. Though nature, red in tooth and claw, with wrathing, shrieked against his creed, who loved, who suffered countless ills, who battled for the true, the just. Shall he be blown about the desert dust, or sealed within the iron hills? No more? A monster then, a dream, a discord, dragons of the prime that tear each other in their slime, were mellow music matched with him. Oh, life is futile, then is frail. Oh, for thy voice to soothe and bless. What hope of answer or redress behind the veil? Behind the veil. Well, this is the, if you like to write in your margins, this is the low point. He's asked the questions that are almost impossible to answer, aren't they? And what I feel so strongly when he's in this poem, what he's is the injustice of it, right? It's just not fair that we could have created the wonders we have created and sung the songs we have sung, and with a splendid purpose in our eyes, he says, who can roll the hymns to wintry skies, who trusted, we trusted the message that God was love indeed, and love, creation's final law. Well, this is why we teach our students at Eastside Catholic, right? God is love. Right? It's the New Testament of God, not the Old Testament of God. We don't want to let them think that they're actually responsible for their sins. It's cool. Never mind. The jury will disregard your final comments. But we teach them that the Christian God is love. He's God of love. God chooses to love you. And then Tennyson puts up against this belief with those famous lines, which everybody knows who never heard of Tennyson. In spite of that belief, nature red in tooth and claw, with wrathing, shrieked against his creed. You want to find evidence against that concept? Where can you find it? Just step outside, buddy. Right? Just step outside. You'll see the tigers and the lions with the blood dripping from them, and the innocent little lambs and gazelles. Turn on channel 9 at 7 o'clock any night, you're going to see something eating something else. And that's the truth. And you can believe that when Tennyson says, what do we do? What do we do? Is life that futile? What is the hope of answer? Or redress? That is, how can we get a balance out of this? Behind the veil. The veil behind what we can't see. Oh, I think here is the veil of faith, which is so hard to find. It's also the veil of life, the veil of death. There's got to be another answer than what nature offers us. Do you have any responses to that? Do you feel the power and the shocking modernity of this? See, when I was in college, nobody wanted to take Tennyson. I mean, those old fogies, the stupid old Victorians, what did they have to say to us? They didn't know a diddly squat. Right? If this isn't the 20th century difficulty of life, then this is a nothing. The 19th century is the 20th century. Somebody have a hand? Yeah, man.
It reminds me of the open vote.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's right. And of course, that is naturalism right there. You're moving on. Here he's asking the question without the, he doesn't want to believe. He does not want to believe the answers to the questions, the implicit answers to the questions he's asking. But by the time you get to Crane's The Open Boat, you know the story? Crane out there in the rowboat, true to life piece of fiction, because he himself was on the open ocean after the Commodore went down and he was in the rowboat. And the whole point of that story is that you're in the boat and you can see the shore of Florida, and you cannot row up to that shore because the breakers will tip you over and you will drown. And people are on the shore and they're waving at you. They think you're out having a good time. You're screaming for help and somebody's dying in your boat, and they think you're up for a picnic, and it's not. And the story is just marvelous as he pushes on and tells you that nature doesn't care that you're in that boat. If you're in the wrong boat at the wrong time, and it's a little 10-foot dinghy, you're dead, and nature will do nothing to stop your death. And the whole story is the articulation of the sense of injustice, I think you'd say, that Crane felt when he was in that boat. And some live and some die. And it turns out, ironically in the story, the one who died is the strongest man in the boat. And the injured man, the captain, survived. And that's because nature doesn't care. It's not going to follow the rules of the strong live and the weak die if it doesn't want to. I think the point we get out of that is don't take a passage on the Titanic. But how do you know which ship is the Titanic? You don't know, do you? And if you hit the iceberg, you're going down. Isn't it interesting that they found that after all these years? Yeah. Allowed to go. Yeah, Virginia.
Gary, I was thinking as you were reading these beautiful verses to Hallam, this personal, that it's so much like the last thing you taught us, the Lear, where he ends, why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life and thou no breath at all? That's really what the whole poem is about. Why Hallam? Why this wonderful Hallam? And therefore, if Hallam can die meaninglessly, if nature is so indifferent to the loveliness of Hallam and all his gifts and so on,
right, then why not?
Then yes, right.
Yeah. Because death is certainly not a consequence of justice. And that is one of the greatest, the most difficult concepts for all of us to come to terms with. There's no justice in the world. Never was. Nothing is fair. But people insisting on fairness.
What is justice?
Yeah, I try to teach my students. They always say, that's not fair, Mr. Culbert. And I say, you're right. That's a lesson in life. Nothing is fair.
I was mentioning about the Scottish history. The sun salvation, that's why it's important.
Oh.
And then when the
Mother Nature is ridiculous because Mother Nature, it's not that you're going to get a spanking if you're in the wrong place. Intellectually, these are fascinating concepts for us to come to terms with. Most of us deal with them in a vague way throughout our adult life. Very seldom are we forced with Tennyson to face this difficult particular loss, except when we go to literature. And it can be in the form of Lear, why is Cordelia dead? Right? And it can be in the form of, or it can be in the form of your own life. Why is Mother dead? Why do people die? Because that's the way it is.
What do you teach your students about their faith in Jesus? It's a sham.
That's right.
Well,
I don't say that, but the point, I think what you do in the Christian context in a high school like this is point out that our desire for fairness on earth has never been part of the Christian, of the Orthodox Christian perspective of the world. It's not here where things are balanced. And that we are, in the 20th century, demanding a kind of redress of inequities on earth that almost no religion offers on earth. I mean, what religion can, whether it's Christianity or any religion of Buddhism, they don't come back. Even if you're a Hindu, you come back in another form to get your redress, don't you? And what we try to teach them is that the message of Christ is to use the love and the caring of Christ to help defend yourself against the natural vagaries of life. If you don't have something to give you support, and the key to Christianity, I think, in the context of teaching in high school, is that what it gives you is community. That it gives you is strength, not isolation. You will not be freed from pain because you're a Christian. There's never been that promise. People would like to say, there are certain preachers who say, if you preach to me, you'll get a car, I promise you, but that's not orthodox. The key is what you get is community, and that's the key, and for me, the purpose of a parochial high school. I think the great weakness in modern education, in the public sector, is not the teaching. The weakness is that our public schools have evolved with the 20th century to a point where the public school teachers cannot offer community except football community. That is the community of perspective in the world, the moral world, which isn't theological, just the morality, is now withdrawn from public schools largely, and the kids are isolated. And there are two reasons to send your kids to a private school. One is you can get a better education there, which may or may not be true. I'm not convinced that I can't send my son to Roosevelt and have him get a wonderful education. I think you can. Or Bellevue High School. But the real reason is that you are thinking in terms of what they get in terms of community. If you ask the kids at East Side, at my school, why do you like East Side? The first thing they always say, just this last week, we finished our accreditation. The schools go through accreditation process. We have a team of 25 people, 3 days on campus, sitting in my classroom, 3 different people. I know what that's like. But they also talk to students. And the unanimous response they got first was the teachers care about us. Right? The students like each other. We like it at East Side because of the community. Second response is the education. And I think that's the key to the answer. Oh, what you get? When I was in college, I went to a Lutheran college, and we were once discussing the doctrine of the Trinity. And the issue was, everybody knows what the Father is, and everybody knows what the Son is, but what in the world is the Holy Ghost? Right? Nobody wants to talk about it because it's so vague. But I got a great answer, which I think has satisfied me for a long time. I do not have a highly religious temperament, but this has satisfied my sense of theology. The professor said that the Holy Ghost is the community. It's God's presence in a group of people who share beliefs and care for each other. That's how the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit manifests itself, in taking care of each other. And that's what a church is then. A church is a group of people who care for each other and look after each other. And that's for him what it means. Now, it does solve a lot, because I can sense that and I can feel it. I don't have to think about it. I don't need the image of a dove or whatever it might be, up there flittering around. And that's, but you see, the context of in memoriam is that he's pulled himself so far away from Orthodox religion that he doesn't immediately feel what we're talking about. And I think that's the case of a lot of people in the 20th century. How many people live in the tightly knit community which is holding back the waves of the 20th century? Most people do not anymore. They weren't then either. It was dying. And when was the last time you knew who you were? Well, probably it was the day that Lyrical Ballads was published. That was the end of the 18th century, if you want to look for a date. And the beginning of a century when you didn't know, you had to find it for yourself. And that's a hard time for us ever since. Why do you like reading literature before the 19th century? I think you like it because when you come across a great writer, you feel a sense of confidence. Milton didn't doubt who he was, right? You just read Paradise Lost. I had a student last spring, after we finished Paradise Lost, she wrote an essay discussing the whole issue. And they think they get more theology in my class than in 12 years of parochial education. Probably true. And she said, after all of this, she said, I have come to decide that Milton was inspired by God. Or is it really going to be new news to the Pope, People love that. But the key, I think, to the attractiveness of Milton is he says, let me think with you about religion, and I'll explain to you something about sin, right, and about guilt. And we've got a story we'll tell you about. It's called Adam and Eve. And that is one of our essential mythologies. And when you read that, you understand what it is to be an adult. Not an innocent, an adult. Because it's about the fall. It's about the life you and I live. And how hard it is to be good. In fact, it's impossible, isn't it? And so the kids like that. And I don't think Milton was inspired, but he knew that he knew what he had to say. And he said it. And that's the confidence that you get with the era before the Romantic period, when you could express your culture. And Milton would have been astonished if anybody had said, this is nothing at all. There's nothing there at all. Couldn't have believed it. And not only Milton, but any other theologian of his day. The Catholics knew what they believed, didn't they? The Presbyterians did, the Quakers did. It was an era, even though of division, it was an era of faith. And we don't have that faith anymore. We don't fight anymore. We don't even define our faith anymore, do we? We don't ask those questions. Some of my students don't even know the difference between the word Presbyterian and Protestant. Well, how can they call themselves Catholic if they can't even hear that those are different words, and they don't know that a Presbyterian is a kind of Protestant, right? So it's an interesting issue. It's the 20th century. Well, let's see. It's time for a cup of coffee anyway. I meant to tell you at the beginning that at dinner table last night, I mentioned I was going here, and Emily said, my daughter said, well, where are you going tomorrow? I said, well, I'm going to a lecture in downtown. I said, to the Women's Club? Yeah. Oh, why? Well, they like to read literature, and I know about it, and I can tell them about it. Oh, why do you go? I said, well, I make a little money. Oh, and I said, yeah, I've been doing it for about 10 years. She said, 10 years, huh? You mean you were doing that when you were 31? And I said, yeah. She said, gee, you started young. So, and I said, eat your rutabagas, and that was it. Okay, we'll pick up in a few more minutes. Well, we're at the bottom, and what we can do now in the second hour is bring ourselves out of this state of emotional and intellectual, I suppose, to lack of energy. And you see in number 57, he's making a shift in this sonnet, this lyric, and the next lyric that'll bring him away. I had to plan these lectures so that we wouldn't end where we just finished in the first hour, because I wouldn't want to go away with that being our last message, and we'll be able to bring ourselves up to a better plane by the time we're done. But you notice the depth of behind the veil, behind the veil. So it's number 57. Peace, come away. The song of woe is after all an earthly song. Peace, come away. We do him wrong to sing so wildly. Let us go. He's speaking, I think, to himself here. This is the poet saying, just a minute, we don't want to get carried away. And that grief is when you look at it, clearly a consequence of experience on earth. And if we get a little perspective, which is what Emerson would have said right away to this, you remember Emerson, his immediate response to the depth of grief that we see here would be just back up a little bit. Back up, because the sentiments you're feeling at this point are the sentiments of one who's taken loss so close to himself that you can't see any broader context whatsoever. You're taking it all as individual, and the only way to understand life is to pull away. It may not be nature with the type, but the truth is you still have to back up. Come, let's go. Your cheeks are pale, but half my life I leave behind. Methinks my friend is richly shrined, but I shall pass. My work will fail. Yet in these ears, till hearing dies, one set slow bell will seem to toll the passing of the sweetest soul that ever looked with human eyes. I hear it now, and o'er, eternal greetings to the dead, and Ave, Ave, Ave said. Adieu, adieu, forevermore. That is, he looks at himself and he's trying to convince himself that what you can do with the dead is let them go. Let them go into their, as he says, their rich shrines. And he must look to his own life. He may have only half his life done. If he's got another 35 years to go, or however many, he must do something with it. And he wonders if he will not, in the end, have the same success that Hallam had with his life. That one can die young as a success, and if he goes on, passes on with his work failing in the long run, he may have failed his life. So the journey still is to go with him. And you notice in poem 58 that there is a shift in tone and a shift in tense as well. He's trying to begin the upward climb. The shape of this is very similar to the shape of Song of Myself by Whitman, where he takes you into great depths of involvement and participation in grief and sadness, and then brings you out. And now he's at the bottom. He's going to try to pull himself out with some further understandings. In those sad words, I took farewell. That is, this is how he said, he made a moment. I suspect most of us understand that the purpose of a funeral is for ourselves, to say goodbye. I didn't go to the funeral I referred to because I expected him to be cognizant of why I was there. I was only one of a large number. But a funeral for me is very much the kind of formal, you put on your suit and you do something you don't want to do because it's the way we psychologically recognize a kind of passing. Death is a kind of passing. It doesn't mean that the person's influence is gone from your life, but you say farewell. And Tennyson picks this up and says what you say. Hail, hail, hail. Right? It's the Latin. And then you say adieu. And we all know that adieu is the French go with God. It's not au revoir, I'll see you again. It's what you say when you're saying goodbye for a long time. In those sad words, I took farewell, like echoes in sepulchral halls, as drop by drop the water falls in vaults and catacombs. They fell. And falling, idly broke the peace of hearts that beat from day to day, half conscious of their dying clay in those cold crypts where they shall cease. The high muse answered, wherefore grieve thy brethren with a fruitless tear? Abide a little longer here, and thou shalt take a nobler leave. He's saying that the poems that have been written can partly be seen as an interruption in people's lives, can't they? Partly what they are is reminding people of something which they don't need to be reminded of. he needs to perhaps stay and consider a little more before he just says goodbye forever. And maybe he can raise himself to a level where he won't be just disrupting people. He'll actually be saying something valuable. Poem number 59 parallels number 3. O sorrow, wilt thou live with me, no casual mistress, but a wife, my bosom friend and half of life, as I confess it needs must be. O sorrow, wilt thou rule my blood, be sometimes lovely like a bride, and put thy harsher moods aside, if thou wilt have me wise and good. My centered passion cannot move, nor will it lessen from today, but I'll have leave at times to play, as with the creature of my love, and set thee forth, for thou art mine, with so much hope for years to come, that howsoe'er I know thee, some could hardly tell what name was thine. It's an interesting concept that what do you do in the long run? Well, you can't say goodbye, I will not forget you. I will forget you, I will not remember you, I will not grieve. The task for anybody who lost someone he or she loved is how to live with grief in a way that makes it not, as he says here, a continuation of endless harsh moods that weaken you, enfeeble you, but a way of continuing to live in such a fashion, perhaps, that even the people who see you don't know that you're carrying a kind of continual grief and loss with you. And maybe you're even going out and enjoying life. Emerson knew this was true as well. And so what he's pursuing now in sections 60 through 65 is an exploration of the relationship between his soul and the soul of Hallam, in a kind of continuing, ongoing mode. What can he expect in the next years? He passed. Interesting opening 2 words for a poem. He passed. The finality of that is so strong, isn't it? With a colon afterwards. A soul of nobler tone, my spirit loved and loves him yet, like some poor girl whose heart is set on one whose rank exceeds her own. In other words, totally hopeless. You know. He mixing with his proper sphere, she finds the baseness of her lot, half jealous of she knows not what, and envying all that meet him there. The little village looks forlorn. She sighs amid her narrow days, moving about the household ways in that dark house where she was born. The foolish neighbors come and go and tease her till the day draws by. At night she weeps, how vain am I? How should he love a thing so low? It's his image of the relationship between himself and the lost. How can he aspire? She lives, you notice in the word, the phrase, in the dark house, just like that in poems of 9 and 7, the one we read last week. And really upbraids herself for the fact that there's no possibility of it working. And now we've got to explore what this means. Can you love from afar? If in thy second state sublime, thy ransomed reason chained replies with all the circle of the wise, perfect flower of human time. And if thou cast thine eyes below, how dimly charactered and slight, how dwarfed a growth of cold and night, how blanched with darkness must I grow. Yet turn thee to the doubtful shore, where thy firstborn was made a man. I love thee, spirit, nor can the soul of Shakespeare love thee more. I've wondered if that means that he imagines that he's up there in a drawing room and Shakespeare's made an acquaintance with Hallam and is now probably writing immemorial sonnets to his new friend. And he's reminding Hallam that if he keeps one eye down, like the woman in Rossetti's poem, leaning over the gold bar of heaven. Yeah, I wondered if that's just a subtle reminder that I am a poet too, and I'm a pretty good one. Don't hang around with Shakespeare. I don't think it's supposed to be funny, but I always smile when I come across that poem.
Oh,
So,
Harry, no, he means that the soul of Shakespeare was one of the greatest souls that ever lived.
yes,
And so the soul of Shakespeare couldn't love him more than Tennyson's soul.
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
But I think it's funny. I mean, he's only Tennyson. He's not Shakespeare after all. Right. So.
No, but But when you're comparing yourself to Shakespeare's
That's-
soul, you
sure.
have to have the width and depth and
And breadth,
brilliance of
yeah.
all the world in your...
Yeah. So he's making a claim of that ability.
No, he's saying no one could have loved you more than I do, not
Even
even Shakespeare.
That's right. So that means that Shakespeare at his greatest could not love him more than Tennyson does right now, which is enormously true.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think it's funny that he compares himself to Shakespeare because they're both poets.
I don't think he is, though. I think no soul, even the best soul I can think of, could love you more than I
Yeah.
do.
That's my own acid sense of humor involved here. I don't think it's the poem.
Eat your rutabaga.
Yeah. 64. No, take 63. That would go down another lyric. Yet pity for a horse o'erdrawn, and love in which my hound has part, can hang no weight upon my heart in its assumptions up to heaven. And I am so much more than these, as thou, perchance, art more than I. And yet I spare them sympathy, and I would set their pains at ease. So mayest thou watch me where I weep, as unto vaster motions bound, the circuits of thine orbit round, a higher height, a deeper deep. This is interesting because what you see him doing is trying to find a place in a cosmography, is that the word, for himself, with a consciousness of where Hallam is. And Tennyson's point is fairly simple, and it's a nice one. I take time out of my day to feel sorry for my horse if it's been abused. I worry about my cat, or my parakeet, or my goldfish. You must be certainly as high above me, translated above me, as I am above these. And on the grounds of analogy then, perhaps you do retain a little interest. Whatever you are, way up there where I can't talk to you, the way my fish can't talk to me. And as he's trying to find analogies to give himself some understanding of this. Dost thou look back on what hath been, as some divinely gifted man whose life in low estate began, and on a simple village green, who breaks his birth's invidious bar, and grasps the skirts of happy chance, and breasts the blows of circumstance, and grapples with his evil star, who makes by force his merit known, and lives to clutch the golden keys, to mold a mighty state's decrees, and shape the whisper of the throne, and moving up from higher to higher, becomes on fortune's crowning slope the pillar of a people's hope, the center of a world's desire. Yet feels, as in a pensive dream, when all his active powers are still, a distant dearness in the hill, secret sweetness in the stream, the limit of his narrower fate, while yet beside its vocal springs, he played at counselors and kings with one who was his earliest mate, who plows with pain his native lea, and reaps the labor of his hands, or in the furrow musing stands. Is my old friend, remember me? Very nice lyric as well. And you can imagine this easily in modern context. It's got to refer to someone like President Lincoln, born in a log cabin in Tennessee, or is that Davy Crockett, or somebody like that, who came from nowhere, and you wonder, does the person who comes, and he's got this marvelously aggressive quality of these lines, right, who breaks and grasps and breasts and grapples with his evil star, the man who faces fate and says, I'm going to make my way from the log cabin to the White House, or who else is poor? Truman started out as something like a hat man or something, right? And up there, and you know that back home, there's maybe somebody who went to school with him, whose evil fate of not making it, right, kept him there, and wonders, does that person remember? I think Lincoln did have a connection to his past. I think he never lost that. And I suspect most people who reach a position of power have somewhere in them a memory of the time when they were not there. And once again, what Tennyson does is try to find a language to clarify for us the separation. The nice thing about this for me is that it's a far more vivid image than the previous one, which also works, the image of the animals, him to animals, Hallam to him. But this poem is so substantially written that you get the sense of enormous distance from the farm to power, the image of the golden keys. Right? make it work. Maybe you remember me. And so he says, sweet soul, do with me as thou wilt. I lull a fancy trouble tossed with love's too precious to be lost. A little grain shall not be spilt. And in that solace can I sing, till out of painful phases wrought there flutters up a happy thought, self-balanced on a lightsome wing. Since we deserve the name of friends, and thine effect so lives in me, a part of mine may live in thee, and move beyond to noble ends. Interesting concept there too. Partly what he's saying is that it seems to me that what I do by singing these songs is assuage my pain by saying something over and over so long that it starts to be believable. Love is too precious to be lost. There's no love lost anywhere. And since I can say that, my love for you must have some continuing value. And I kind of like the opening line of this. You don't have to do anything. This is really me going through my problems right now. And he speaks in 66, pardon me. You thought my heart too far diseased. You wonder, when my fancies play, to find me gay among the gay, like one with any trifle pleased. The shade by which my life was crossed, which makes a desert in the mind, has made me kindly with my kind, like to him whose sight is lost, whose feet are guided through the land, whose jest among his friends is free, who takes the children on his knee and winds their curls about his hand. He plays with threads, he beats his chair for pastime, dreaming of the sky. His inner day can never die, his night of loss is always there. The question is, how can you continue to go on living if you become blind? There's got to be a kind of Miltonic image here, doesn't there? You can imagine Milton living the life of a blind man and being happy anyway, and finding that even the person who's lost his sight, in his case, the blindness and the darkness is inside, that he can still go on. You can still take little kids in your knees, can't you, and curl their hair in your hand. You still have other senses that you can use. And it's an interesting question. 67 to 71 are about night and sleep and dreams. As he pushes those, let's pick up with, say, number 70 to picture, to get into this movement. Interior qualities. The lack of vision is an image that reappears and reappears. Blindness, not seeing quite right. Number 70. I notice that whenever I'm doing something like this, I have to stumble when I say the numbers because I have to translate those Roman numerals. LXX, you know. I cannot see the features right. When on the gloom I strive to paint the face I know. The hues are final and mixed with hollow masks of night. Cloud towers by ghostly masons wrought, a gulf that ever shuts and gapes, a hand that points, and palled shapes and shadowy thoroughfares of thought, and crowds that stream from yawning doors, and shoals of puckered faces drive, dark bulks that tumble half alive, and lazy length on boundless shores. Till all at once, beyond the will, I hear a wizard music roll, and through a lattice on the soul looks thy fair face, and makes it still. I think you might be catching how lovely these are in and of themselves. Any single lyric has this incredible power to stand on its own feet. It's an interesting concept. As he's saying, I try to write poems, and I lose the vision, don't I? I lose the ability to see you. I cannot see the features when I try to paint this on the gloom. He can't create Hallam when he's in a totally gloomy mood, because Hallam was not a gloomy man. He was a young and outgoing and vital person. And so the mood of gloom translates itself in him so that he feels his poetry doesn't even suffice. And you get some nice lines here. A hand that points and palled shapes. Crowds stream from yawning doors. Shoals of puckered faces drive. I like that line, don't you? I can just see whole shoals of puckered faces. I'm not sure what a puckered face would be. Is it a disapproving face, perhaps? Or a pucker because of sourness? Not liking like you've bitten into a lemon? Sleep. And of course then he says, he hears all of a sudden through a hole, in comes the image, and bang, and through a hole in the gloom, I think is what he's saying, and bang, there is Helen once again. It's a fair face, and it calms everything else. Sleep, kinsman thou, to dust, to death and trance and madness, thou hast forged at last a night-long present of the past, in which we went through summer France. What has happened to him? Yeah, he's had a dream. And you know how dreams can recreate reality. Sometimes it's better than the life you wake up. You go back to a time of pleasure. Hast thou such credit with the soul? Then bring an opiate trebly strong, drug down the blindfold sense of wrong, so that my pleasure may be whole. He says that if this is possible, what would he like? One 3 times as strong, an opiate, something to put him sound asleep into this world of dreams. While now we talk as once we did of men and minds, the dust of change, the days that grow to something strange, in walking as of old we walked, beside the river's wooded reach, the fortress and the human and the mountain ridge, the cataract flashing from the bridge, the breaker breaking on the beach. He brings back a marvelous image, and then with number 72, we come across the second anniversary of the death. And now that we're in the second half of the poem and moving towards the end, we're going to find that the kind of grief and memory is different. It's the quality that comes with loss after time passes. It's not this sharp pang of grief that descends into sorrow that doesn't want to rise at all. He's coming to terms with it. Risest thou thus, dim dawn again, and howlest, issuing out of night, with blasts that blow the poplar white, and lash with storm the streaming pane. Day, when my crowned estate begun to pine in that reverse of doom, which sickened every living bloom and blurred the splendor of the sun. The same day, in other words, when he first heard that Helen has died, the day of his death. Who usherest in the dolorous hour with thy quick tears that make the rose pull sideways, and the daisy close her crimson fringes to the shower. Who mightest have heaved a windless flame up the deep east, or whispering played a checkerwork of beam and shade along the hills, yet looked the same, as wan, as chill, as wild as now. Day marked as with some hideous crime, when a dark hand struck down through time and cancelled nature's best. But thou lift as thou mayest thy burdened brows through clouds that drench the morning star, and whirl the ungarnered sheaf afar, and sow the sky with flying boughs, and up thy vault with roaring sound climb thy thick noon, disastrous day, touch thy gold, the dull goal of joyless gray, and hide thy shame beneath the ground. And he picks up then with numbers LXIII, 73, series from there to number 77 on fame and human life. You want to jot that down and pick up some of these. Let's pick up number 75. Take a look at that. I leave thy praises unexpressed in verse that brings myself relief. And by the measure of my grief I leave thy greatness to be guessed. What practice, howsoe'er expert in fitting aptest words to things, or voice the richest tone that sings, hath power to give thee as thou wert. I care not in these fading days to raise a cry that lasts not long, and round thee with the breeze of song to stir a little dust of praise. Thy leaf has perished in the green, and while we breathe beneath the sun, the world which credits what is done is cold to all that might have been. So here shall silence guard thy fame, but somewhere, out of human view, whate'er thy hands are set to do, is wrought with tumult of acclaim. That's an interesting one, too, dealing with the issue of potential, I think, isn't it? I can sing a song about you, but the simple fact of life is that what you could have done is essentially uninteresting to the universe on Earth, isn't it? You don't get any credit for what might have been. And so when you're cut down in youth, all you are is potential. How can one judge? He says, if you are doing anything well, if you're doing what you had the capacity to do, it is someplace else, somewhere, out of human view. And that brings back the issue of the whole purpose of the poem. I mean, what is he to do with Hallam insofar as he desires to present Hallam to us as readers? We cannot perceive him, can we? The purpose of the poem ultimately is to give us Tennyson and not Hallam, for which reason when I've taught the poem, as I do teach it pretty much every year a little bit, I don't go anywhere near the depth we're going, I just push aside the students' questions about Hallam as a person, because the students want to know who is the man who inspired this? What was he like? And I tend to come back with this poem here, which is, I can't tell you. We'd have to get to Hallam himself. But Hallam didn't live a life long enough to make it work. This is a poem about Tennyson, and not about Hallam. And it could be about anybody who died. The specific personal relationship between the two men is not pertinent. It's the grief that you endure and how you come to terms with it. And he understands that. Take wings of fancy and descend, and in a moment set thy face where all the starry heavens of space are sharpened to a needle's end. Take wings of foresight, lighten through the secular abyss to come, and lo, thy deepest lays are dumb before the mouldering of a yew. And if the matin songs that woke the darkness of our planet last, thine own shall wither in the vast, ere half the lifetime of an oak. Ere these have clothed their branchy bowers with 50 Mays, thy songs are vain. And what are they when these remain? The ruined shells of hollow towers. Who is he talking to? Probably. He's talking to himself. You know, the poems he may write. If you can look into the future, you'll discover that the most wonderful poems are dumb before the moldering of a yew. And there's the yew tree appearing again. The tree which has got something so intrinsically deep in its experience of life and death that the poem about that phenomenon will be far gone before we understand what the yew represents in its cycle of life and its cycle of death. As we move down another poem, we come to, no, I suppose we should look at 77. What hope is here for modern rhyme to him who turns a musing eye on songs and deeds and lives that lie foreshortened in the tract of time? I'm trying to remember if I have encountered the word modern before this period as a representation of the current time. It's not a very common word, but Tennyson uses it, and you see he's very clearly aware of the consequences of being in the 19th century. How can I do this? What hope can I give in poetry today, who looks musingly at songs, the deeds, the acts of life, and the lives that lie foreshortened in the tract of time? The implication being, I think, that if you look at the future, we in the 19th century have a far clearer sense of the natural processes of time. We could say that dinosaurs were on the earth from here to here, and we could create sort of a time chart and say, well, this is the span of man, like the chart scientists use, where they say, if you start here, you can go a mile and a half, and the appearance of man on earth is the last 6 inches, and the appearance of civilization is the last quarter of an inch. You see the point there? So if you say, well, here's the human life, since we have a far clearer sense of the scope of the movement of time, how can you say anything? What is a human life? What is 30 years of human life? When you foreshorten the life by looking at it in the long view, which now we can do. 30 years is a long time if you're 15 years through it, but from the point of view of 60, or the point of view of 80, 30 years is nothing. And now we can do this with all things, can't we? You know what foreshortening is? You see the width of my hand? How big is my hand? Well, it's foreshortened, isn't it, by so it's only this wide. Interesting. I think it's a good point. These mortal lullabies of pain may bind a book, may line a box, may serve to curl a maiden's locks, or when 1,000 moons shall wane, a man upon a stall may find and passing turn the page that tells a grief, then change to something else, sung by a long forgotten mind. But what of that? My darkened ways shall ring with music all the same. To breathe my loss is more than fame, to utter love more sweet than praise. What can he not worry about if he's a poet? What's going to happen to the book? So last week, I was talking to a student and I said, no, I want you to know that this is due on Thursday, and you write it down in your notebook. And so the kid turns to take the text and wrote, take test on Sydney on Thursday, ripped the page out. I said, what did you do? He said, well, I just sent the paper. And in the process, ripped out 2 sonnets from Astrophel and Stella and Wyatt's Whoso Lists to Hunt, right? Well, what can you say? Shakespeare says that as long as my poetry is alive, my love is alive, but he didn't realize how vicious some people could be if they're in high school. But that's what can happen, can't it? And in fact, if a girl's got a book of in memoriam and she's got a date tomorrow night and she wants her hair curled, what's she likely to do? She'll grab those papers and she'll rip them up in strips because the date with Billy tomorrow night is a lot more important than Tennyson's thoughts on Helen. True? Yeah. And so he says, obviously, I have to be in the act of singing that I find my value. I have to be happy in the song and not worry about what's going to happen about it. I like to think of this because we'll probably be doing Browning in the spring. And Browning's magnum opus, The Ring in the Book, which we would never do because the book just stinks, was written when he picked up a book in a stall. And it had the story of a crime, murder and a punishment. And he got the idea of writing a book of monologues from every angle in that crime. So the first book is one of the characters say the girl who was murdered, and then the next one is the story of that murder from the murderer's point of view, and then the father of the girl, and then the judge, and then the prosecutor. Fascinating book, great summer reading. But the amusing thing to think about is that it was brought to life just by Browning taking a walk in the bookstall and pulling up something that was totally forgotten. He rewrote the story of the murder, and now we have The Ring in the Book. Marvelous piece of writing. And that could happen to Tennyson, couldn't it? It's just chance that it hasn't happened. Number 78. Again, at Christmas, did we weave the holly round the Christmas hearth. The silent snow possessed the earth and calmly fell on Christmas Eve. Well, Christmases will continue, won't they? The Yule clog sparkled keen with frost. No wing of wind the region swept, but over all things brooding slept the quiet sense of something lost. As in the winters left behind, again our ancient games had place. The mimic picture is breathing grace and dance and song and footmen blind. Who showed a token of distress? No single tear, no mark of pain. Oh sorrow, then, can sorrow wane? Oh grief, can grief be changed to less? Oh last regret, regret can die. No, mixed with all this mystic frame, her deep relations are the same, but with long use, her tears are dry. Another very fine lyric. It picks up the point, if you remember from Emerson's essays a couple of years ago, when he talks about the death of his son, and says that one of the most awful elements of grief is that after a year, you've lost that too. That is, grief reminds you of life and of the value of people. And he says a year later, it's just like having lost a vast estate. It's as though I owned a house on Camino Island, and someone got it away from me. And that's how it feels that my son is dead. And he's unhappy that even the intensity of grief goes away. If that could be kept, that sure knowledge of the vitality of life that you get with grief, he would glad to have grief because that's real. But even that goes away. And Tennyson picks up this idea He's remembering last Christmas when they were trying to play their games. What happened? They started crying, didn't they? Because the immediacy of the loss was with them. And now they play their games, but they don't cry anymore. So the rituals are retained, and he asks crucial questions, which are very interesting. They're playing blind man's bluff, apparently. Hoodman blind, I assume, is blind man's bluff, isn't it? Who showed a token of distress? Clearly, as he imagines this event, he was looking around to see who might start their quivering lip, something like that, and seeing none of it. Who showed a token of distress? No single tear, no mark of pain. Oh, sorrow, when can sorrow wane? What is the new sorrow? That you don't sorrow so much anymore. To wane means to lessen, to fall away. Oh, grief, can grief be changed to less? What's the new grief? That you don't grieve so much anymore. Oh, last regret, regret can die. Is that what we must think of? Is the last thing we regret in life that we don't regret anymore? That we become inured or used to it? But you see what he does in the end is to deny that ultimately. No. Mixed with all this mystic frame, her deep relations are the same, but with long use, her tears are dry. What's the reality? You can't cry forever. You can't. And so the well of grief that manifested itself in external forms is gone, and in fact he's coming to terms with sorrow, isn't he? He's living with it. You can still have Christmas festival if you have to have it. This is number 79, the next one is. This is recalling number 9, poem number 9, to remember it. More than my brothers are to me, he recalls the line from the poem that he loved Helen more than his own brothers. Let this not vex thee, noble heart. I know thee of what force thou art to hold the costliest love in fee. But thou and I are one in kind, as molded like in nature's mint, and hill and wood and field did print the same sweet forms in either mind. For us the same cold streamlet curled through all his eddying coves, the same all winds that roam the twilight came in whispers of the beauteous world. At one dear knee we proffered vows, one lesson from one book we learned, ere childhood's flaxen ringlet turned to black and brown on kindred brows. And so my wealth resembles thine, but he was rich where I was poor, and he supplied my want the more, as his unlikeness fitted mine. If any vague desire should rise, that holy death ere Arthur died had moved me kindly from his side and dropped the dust on tearless eyes, then fancy shapes, as fancy can, the grief my loss in him had wrought, a grief as deep